All right, I think we are ready to start. I'm happy to see already some familiar faces from the attendees, but also new people that we're seeing for the first time. My name is Zvika. I'm from Mentayo. Together with me is Dr. Anat Itay-Sarig, who will be the leading panelist to give the exciting talk today. There's more people from the Mentayo team who will help with moderation, answering questions, making sure you feel comfortable and happy with us today. Thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate this, and I hope we will spend nice time together and an interesting discussion. The reason we brought you here is that we in Mentayo are super interested in discussion boards, in how learning process has adapted through COVID and the things that are now happening, the new trends. We see ourselves as one that try to enrich the industry and share with you phenomena that we see in active learning and remote learning and how this industry has evolved tremendously over the last year. We actually develop a software product that allows instructor to manage their classroom and help with student engagement and assessment. And we will be obviously happy to talk about what Mentayo does, and it's being adopted quite heavily within higher education institutions, high schools, but we leave it to a later part of the conversation. I'm very, very pleased that you are here with us. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Anat Itay-Sarig, who will be sharing her screen and giving you an interesting view of how active learning works these days in this very exciting era. I'd like to encourage each and every one of you to use the chat, to use the Q&A part, to share with us your experiences, your questions. Some of you have actually sent us questions in advance, and Anat is really prepared and happy to address them. Let's make it interactive and fun, and let's get started. Thank you again for your time, and please use the chat. Tell us where you're from. We are excited to meet you all. Have a great talk today. Go ahead, Anat.
Thank you, Zvika. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm really excited to see some familiar names on the chat. Lovely that you could join us today. And thank you to all of you, also the ones that I don't know, obviously, that are here today. I'm really excited to be giving this talk today and talk about active learning and how it comes across with discussion boards and in particular Mentayo. So I'll dive right in. The agenda for today, as far as I'm concerned, is kind of giving you a quick intro. First of all, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and I've been reading what you wrote in the chat about yourselves, and please feel free to write some more. It will be helpful in the Q&A part and also generally as I speak. I'll speak about active learning, the reasoning for it, the rationale, the tools who make it better, and the benefits from it, also connected to what is really close to my heart, which is general well-being. We'll have a quick Zoom poll at some point, and later on we'll dive deeper into Mentayo and why I think this platform is so important and beneficial for active learning. Then we'll have some time for Q&A, and I'll try to get that part to be as extensive as possible, and we'll conclude with some concluding remarks and of course thank yous all around. So I'll jump right in to introduce myself a little better. My PhD is in political science. My expertise is well-being, and I teach over the years. I have been teaching and still teach in political science departments or government schools, as well as in business schools, topics around the areas of strategy and policy towards well-being. Throughout my career, I do a lot of theory, but I also do a lot of actual practice work of developing indicators for organizations, for government, for corporates, anything that has to do with increasing well-being of people. It could be societies, it could be employees, it could be students. All of that is really close to my heart. And I love teaching. That's the additional part. I really, really love teaching. I feel that that's where knowledge is being created. And it's not just created by me speaking to my students, it's getting created, it is being created by this mutual discussion that we have. So I teach policy and strategy towards progress and well-being, over 10 years of teaching. And I think for most of you, if I got some of the pre-webinar survey questions right or answers right, then we have in the audience some teachers, some professors that teach various topics and from various disciplines. And so I think it's important that I mention that normally what I teach is are courses that are constructed of parts of theory and parts of global use cases that I share with my students, as well as very practical, how do we measure this and that? So that is also an additional aspect. Usually average size of my class is about 40 students. And I think that it's important to emphasize that what really I'm focusing on is trying to create with my students the notion of care in the sense that they are being seen and heard, and I care about what they think and bring to the class, as well as making sure that they are engaged. Now, just to kind of bring this all together, in addition to teach in universities, I'm also head of academic partnerships at Ment.io. And I got to Ment.io out of this passion for well-being and teaching, and you'll see later on how it all connects. So I'll dive right into some of what I think are the most crucial aspects when we're thinking about active learning. Why? Why do we need active learning? So we all know, and this is not new, and this is not a phenomena only limited to COVID times, which hopefully will be over soon, limited attention spans. Students won't read for long periods of time and won't listen for long periods of time. And that connects directly to the fact that they are being distracted by technology constantly. And that leads us in a place where I feel, and I know many of the professors that I speak to around the world feel that it is more difficult to adopt and kind of understand knowledge as it's being created over a class. And really distressing, I would say, is the fact that we don't know what they know unless we quiz them all the time and ask them to write assignments all the time, which is not something that I think would produce the desired outcome. So we're sitting in classes, or we're teaching now remotely online with students having their laptops right in front of them, their mobile phones next to them. They're constantly busy. And part of the question for me that led me to technology and to active learning in this sense is, how do I harness technology to be a better teacher? How do I not fight technology? And this is something that also came up in one of the questions that you asked before the webinar. How do I stop fighting technology but harness it to my favor? And this is what I've been doing for, I can say, I think 10 years, and Ment.io is a very big part of it in the last period of time. And I'll jump right to kind of sharing what I think is in the heart of this topic of active learning. We want to engage students through activating them, really, to be reflective over what they think, to make decisions, right? Even when I try to decide whether I agree or disagree with something, it's a decision that is being made, and it resonates something in my thinking process that is more effective than if I was just sitting on the fence going, okay, so I hear from the professor that someone thinks A and somebody else claims or argues B. So that is also really, really effective. And of course, actions. How do we make sure that they actively do something in class? For me, this list kind of encapsulates how and why we should be generating this ownership over the studying, the learning process. First of all, no student is a clean slate, right? They don't show up in class tabula rasa, knowing nothing. They have their experience, they have their thoughts. That knowledge is extremely valuable. I don't think I'm rocking anyone's world here when I'm saying that what students are bringing into the classroom is essential to what we do. Everything that I can say in the classroom is meaningless unless it meets their experience and their knowledge. And one of two cases can occur here. First, that what they bring to the table is increasing the knowledge in the classroom and making it even more valuable and even more enriched. The alternative is that they might be wrong. Sometimes they are wrong, and I'll speak about this very shortly. That's also a good thing, because that gives us an opportunity to take that so-called mistake or miss something and build that into something new. So extremely important to pay attention to the knowledge and experience of our students. Static information is really not effective. I would be truly surprised if you will tell me that you're just standing there either in Zoom or in the classroom and just talking to your students. We all know, and I think that's why I'll just mention this briefly, this is listening is one way of learning. It's not the best way to do that. However, they do need to listen every once in a while, and we did mention the short attention span, the limited attention span. So we should be talking, but we should putting much more emphasis. We should be putting much more emphasis on what they actually do. The third point relates to the atmosphere that we create in the classroom. How enabling it is, how open it is, how much they feel comfortable to share their thoughts, to share their mistakes, and to bring their knowledge to the table. And lastly, and this has been the case for quite a while now, we are not the only source of information. If we are there to teach them something that is in the textbook, then they should be reading the textbook. It's not worth their time or our time. So what type of knowledge are we bringing to the class? And I think that here in this column is where our true role comes into place. First of all, we'd like to enable them to express themselves. It's important for everyone, for those who are super shy and don't speak in the classroom, and those who express themselves loudly, they need to be able to bring their thoughts to the classroom. Moreover, it enriches the type of discussion, and we'll see it on the discussion board, it enriches the type of conversation in the class. Secondly, more experiences. That actually means, and this is something that should be said, it's sort of a disclaimer, it is slightly harder to engage students than not to engage them. In the sense that once I start engaging my students and they start bringing ideas to the class, it is never the same class. I cannot replicate exactly the same course from one year to the other or from one semester to the other, because students are different and I'm different and knowledge is different. And the articles that they bring and all of that, it makes the experience different. So I build the milestones and I build the classes, but I visit them before class and often based on the discussions that we had in the class in order to make sure that I teach the appropriate materials to this particular class because they are important. It's not just about the material. Making mistakes and being vulnerable. This is actually sort of a quote from one of Menti.io users, one of the professors that I enjoy speaking with about how we use the platform. And he was telling me, in order to empower my students, I start my class saying, every class that I teach, saying, I'm here, I'm vulnerable, and I will make mistakes. And I expect you to do the same. And I love that notion. We are not, we're not always right. We don't have all the answers. Information is also bombarding us. So I love this notion. I'd love to speak about it more, but I think this is strong enough as is. Producing new knowledge, the idea that the magic that happens when students can bring their own knowledge and mash it up with what I bring them in class is incredible. That's true magic. And when they speak to one another, it's even more fantastic, because it's not about them drawing on my knowledge. It's about them drawing on each other's knowledge and creating something that is challenging for me, for them, for anyone else in their surrounding. So this is what we're aiming for. And this is, when I speak of active learning and new tools, this is where I'm aiming for them to create the knowledge. Empowerment is key here, super important to everything that we do. So key notions for me would be, I'm looking to empower the students. I'm looking for them to be engaged and for them to have a dynamic experience. It is not a replica, it always is a dynamic experience. It leaves the question of whose responsibility is it? On the one hand, I want to empower them, and I'll share every possible tool that I can in order to have them empowered and engaged. However, it is still my responsibility to make sure that they understood the basics of what we talked about, and that they took that information and turned it into knowledge. And that is my responsibility and their responsibility. So it's a shared effort that we're taking together. I think that one of the most important aspects for me, and the elements that drew me into using Menti.io and into using technology in my classes and putting such emphasis on active learning, is the variables that impact our well-being. And there are direct ones and there are indirect ones that lead to our increased well-being. And I think I'll start with these, because I think that's very clear how, if we are using the technologies that enable the students to feel engaged and collaborate with one another and create a community of new knowledge, if we do that, then we create the circumstances to increase their well-being. Our well-being, just as a very quick intro to it, is constructed of different domains of our lives, right? It's our environment, our society, our health, our mental health, our safety, all of that. All of these factors and domains are so important to our well-being. And if we can generate recognition, sense of community, sense of achievement, sense of learning, right, to our students, then that's a huge step towards their well-being. And the more direct aspects of well-being, who is composed of these three elements, these are the three factors that we look into whenever we're examining any domain of well-being. We're looking for meaning or purpose, we're looking for an experience, and we're looking for satisfaction. And I think that what I find in active learning is the fact that it increases tremendously the sense of meaning for the students. It is more difficult for them, right? I mean, I'm not trying to advocate for an easier, fun experience. It is fun, it is much more fun, and other talks have covered that. But more than that, it requires them to think, it requires them to draw on their own abilities, and that, at the end of the day, creates a sense of meaning and the rewarding experience of creating something new is extremely powerful. Different types of tools that I'd like to touch upon when we're speaking about active learning. The first type is the type that I would say I use occasionally. Surveys, polls. I love Kahoot. Mentimeter is really useful. Poll Everywhere. I know of various different tools who are really useful to kind of inject that fun, very quick experience, usually synchronously within the class. Similarly effective is Padlet as an example for a writing board, which is just a way to make sure that what they do, I can see, and they can share information with me. And these are all, again, used for synchronous mode, for the experience in class, extremely important. And I am really grateful that these tools exist. The other type of tools are those who are integrated into the teaching in a way that is weaved into the entire teaching process throughout the semester or throughout the year. And in this category, I put special emphasis on discussion boards. For me, they are mostly used in asynchronous manner between classes. I'd like my students to have the time to reflect and contemplate on their arguments, on other people's arguments, and participate in a thoughtful manner. Because I think deep conversation and thoughtful conversation is extremely important, especially in the world that we live in today. Different types of using discussion boards. One is as a Q&A platform, which to me it's important, but it's slightly less powerful, just because there are many tools in which students can turn to me and ask questions, as to you, I'm sure. Student discussions, however, to me are extremely important, either taking part with the instructor, teacher, professor, taking part in the discussions, or without, and then just the students speaking to one another, and we reflect on the outcomes and share it with them. One rule of thumb: all tools should be effective and important to the learning process, regardless of being ad hoc or integrated. Otherwise, really, don't use them. So this is good time for me to practice what I preach. We'll turn to a very quick poll to see how you are teaching, and we'll continue from here. Should I stop sharing in order for the poll to work? Let me see. Tviko? No, it works. Perfect.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so you're all seeing the poll on your screen. The fact that I love technology, by the way, doesn't mean that I master technology, right? So forgive me if there are any tech glitches. So please answer this quick poll, this quick survey, and we'll continue with the results.
In the meantime, I'm sure that all of you have seen the Q&A component of Zoom. I still encourage you to be brave and ask questions we can address later on in the session. Thank you, Daniel, for posting there. Any of you who want to still enrich the discussion with their own questions, please go ahead. And soon Anat will go to the poll result analysis, right?
Yeah. And I'll say in the meanwhile that it's really difficult for me to speak for as long as I've been speaking without hearing you guys. Speaking of active learning, right? Really, really hard.
Okay, a few last seconds before the poll stops.
Okay, we'll see the results in a second. Okay, so let's have a look at this. How much time do you spend on active learning in your classes? And most of you folks are spending between 20 and 50%, and quite a substantial number of you are above 50%, which is really, really impressive and wonderful. What is the biggest learning challenge that you're looking to solve? And it's student engagement that is most painful. Collaboration and assessment are also there quite high, but yeah, it's engagement that is most difficult. Most of you have used discussion boards before. This is cool. Thank you. Are you happy with the tools somewhat? Yeah, I think there are great tools out there, but yeah, I completely understand that there are even better tools, and I'm hoping to share this with you today. The greatest challenge when starting a new edtech tool is student onboarding. No, sorry, it's learning how to use it effectively. Absolutely, absolutely, and I'll refer to it later on. And you usually hear from colleagues recommendations. Yeah, that's what I do normally as well. So thank you so much for sharing this. And I'll jump right into sharing what I think is the best piece of technology that I've ever introduced into my class. And I hear the same from professors from around the world who've been using Ment.io. The idea is to have students express their voice, collaborate, and be empowered through analytics. This is an example of Ment.io customers. And the reason I have this slide here is to remind myself how different users use Ment.io in a different way or have a different focus in terms of the benefit they receive from the tool. Because I think it's really easy to say, and I'll show you in a minute, that Ment.io generates engagement, collaboration, and deeper conversations. But if you look here, you'll see the broader perspective, the additional value, changing the way discussions are taking place, changing how students think about articulating arguments, think about thoughtful challenge to arguments. So all of these things are always a reminder for me, a humble reminder that I am privileged enough to talk about my own experience, but others sometimes use way better than the way I do in any platform that I can speak about. So just to quickly say, and then I'll just show you, which is way better. Ment.io enables structured and easy to read discussions, easy to navigate in discussions. Mostly it is used in an asynchronous manner. Average time on the platform for a student is about 20 minutes, which is really, really impressive and speaks exactly to the point of how do we encourage our students to be more thoughtful and deeper in their thinking. Powerful analytics, I'll show you in a second. And also we should be practical. I don't want to spend hours and hours on assessment, and Ment.io makes my life easier in that sense because it really suggests for me assessment components that I'll show you very briefly. So what you're looking at now is the general discussion page of Ment.io. These are different discussions. Some of them have been closed already, overdue, open discussions. This is a demo page, a demo team on Ment.io. So all these overdues are understandable. It's wonderful to view active live discussions on Ment.io. What you're seeing here is a question on the platform and different answers that had been given by the students. A student goes on the platform and they can see, first of all, they're seeing the answer that is ranked highest on the platform by the AI engine. The AI engine is looking for support and depth of support of arguments. So already you can see the difference between the traditional discussion boards and this discussion board that enables this particular organization of things. And this is AI generated. So you can see different scoring of answers. And when a student goes on the platform and, for example, they would like to have a better look at this particular answer, they can read the answer, ask for clarification, they can agree or disagree or anything in between, and they can mark as insightful. The most interesting part happens when they decide to collaborate and actually create their own arguments. This is where they need to decide whether they agree or disagree with this particular answer and write why. Now, I know not all of you teach rational thinking or philosophy or other disciplines that are really, really interested in how people make arguments. But we all live in today's world. And so making arguments and challenging arguments in a thoughtful, respectful manner is extremely important. And this is where our students are required to articulate to themselves what it is that they're arguing. And it makes everyone's lives easier because everyone visiting the platform, visiting this particular discussion, in this case, can see the agreements and disagreements. And I can scheme through the different answers and only view the agreements and disagreements. I can really also focus in particular on the agreements and disagreements according to segments that I determine when I open this particular team. In addition, I have this menu that enables me to see my participants and see the type of participation that they have. And we are speaking about active learning and how I can see the way my students are being engaged on the platform. So do they only vote? Do they answer or comment? And one difference between Ment.io and other discussion boards is the fact that on Ment.io, answers and comments are equally important. Actually, our goal is to generate a discussion with limited number of answers and many, many comments to these answers, because this is where depth happens. This is where the really important arguments are starting to surface, not just each student throwing their answer to the paper or the screen, right? But really making thoughtful arguments and discussing with others. I can also see an activity log arranged according to time. So I will see in lighter color the comments and answers that I hadn't seen yet, and I can navigate directly to them. I can also only review the highlights of the discussion. So another benefit in the sense that I don't need to spend many, many hours. Again, I'm super passionate about my teaching, but I also need to be mindful of how much time I spend on each class. So this is basically directing me towards the most insightful comments, the most debated areas, the best answers according to a segment or according to the entire group. And this is the main page of a discussion. And what you're seeing here is, let's take, for example, a discussion that had been opened for a week from last class to the class after that. And 2 days before that class, I go on the discussion and I create a discussion recap. Students can do it as well if they generated a question or if I assign them to. But in general, this is what it would look like after the discussion recap. A few more pages that I'd like to show you. Ment.io generates team analytics. So the team can see collaboration, how knowledge is being created, basically, how quality of discussions, general team statistics, activity over time. This is again a demo room type of participation. And I think most interestingly, this is an interesting page when we're speaking about active learning, because this is personal to each and every user. Everything that you've seen so far is visible to everyone. This is visible to each user about themselves. This is where they see how they're doing. This is where they see how they can improve. They can see their thought distance from other users, from other team members, meaning that they can create conversations and elaborate on the topics that they disagree about, sorry. They have this cognitive map of how thorough they are, how balanced they are, and additional elements versus the team median. So again, they know where they stand, which is extremely important when we're trying to empower them. And lastly, in terms of pages on the platform, is the page that is only visible to the admins, which is the assessment spreadsheet. The assessment spreadsheet basically looks at 3 factors. You're seeing 5 elements, 5 components, and they are divided into 3 sectors: engagement, collaboration, and quality. So in engagement, we'd be seeing how many discussions did the students take part in? How many actions have they performed on the platform? in terms of collaboration, how many answers by others have they viewed? And how much did they collaborate with others? And quality in the sense of how thoughtful and how deep were they in their answers. And this is, in a nutshell, what the platform does. Lastly, I'll just show you two quick things. Opening a discussion enables me to enable anonymous mode to increase inclusivity, right? If students feel uncomfortable, I can mark this to enable anonymous mode. I can ask a question, of course, create background, create a due date, and also save as draft if I'm not ready to post the discussion question just yet. I'll stop the demo here, and being mindful of time, I'll take, will 2 minutes be okay, Zvika? And then I'll conclude this part.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll just say a few more things about the platform and wrap everything up. Discussions have these tools that I can use if I want to manage the discussions, and I've just shown you the highlights and so on. Students can see how they're doing. I don't need to hold their hands. This is also part of empowering the students how to improve, really. The assessment tool we've just looked into. I should mention that Ment.io is integrated into all LMSs and into Microsoft Teams. So it doesn't require any additional sign up. If you will be using the web version, then it's a single sign up. So why do I like Ment? Why do I recommend Ment.io? I think teaching in a meaningful manner is in the heart of everything that we do. I want to enable the students to share their experiences and bring it to the table, empower them, and I'll speak about that just very briefly, really learn where they are and understand what they understand and what they didn't. And this is a key point that I couldn't stress enough. We should be asking very clear and interesting questions, and I can elaborate on that if you'd like, if you want to put in a question in the Q&A. Acknowledge and refer to what the students are saying. It's not about them discussing and you teaching. It's about mixing them. Always refer to what they're saying. I open each and every one of my classes with references to their discussions during the week, because that gives them it's just the basic foundations to what we do. Finish a class with sharing your screen and typing the questions as they see them. And then you're making sure that they understand what you're asking and that it is really engaging as you thought it will be. And sometimes I hear from them, I don't understand this exact phrasing, or why are you asking this? So that's really, really important. Decide whether you'd like the students to post their own discussions, and if you want them also to conclude the discussions. Bottom line, it's not easy to create active learning, but it's totally worth it. There are great tools out there. What we teach really does matter, and it has to be dynamic. I learn as I go, and I really wholeheartedly recommend be vulnerable and learn on the go yourselves, not just the students. And lastly, don't forget to enjoy. Teaching is a joy if we are willing to be dynamic and accept external knowledge or internal knowledge from the class. And that's it for me until this point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anat. Always having this kind of sessions reminds me that we feel that we have, on one hand, some expertise, and we develop a software product, Ment.io, but we also have a depth to the industry, right? We are all in the same industry. We are strong advocates of learning, and everyone who joined this session today is obviously in the same group with us. So whenever we have the chance to share some best practices and thoughts, we're having such sessions, and I'm glad that your questions on the Q&A and on the chat reflect your inner thoughts about how active learning and remote learning could be improved. On one hand, questions about the Ment.io platform in general, which we are obviously making available to you, and we're happy to continue the discussions and demo even after the session, and we'll give you some contact details of ours that we can talk. I'd like to use the remaining time we have to address at least a few questions that came via chat. I think it would be a good way to continue the discussion and having even more in-depth thoughts about the dilemmas that we're seeing. And then we take it from there. So Anat, if you don't mind, I might refer some questions to you, if that's okay. A question coming from Daniel, and he mentioned the fact that you are examining various tools. What do you think about the learning curve of introducing various tools in the classes that you teach? And how do you make sure that the learning curve is not too high and actually helps with material synthesis and making sure that students adapt to those tools and use them to their benefits? How do you choose your tool sets, and maybe something about that?
Thank you. I think it's a such an important question. Thank you for asking that. I try not to bombard them with tools. That is the first piece of advice I give myself. But the second one, and I think that's the important one, I take into account that there is a learning curve, that they won't be great when they start working with a new tool. That if let's talk about different types of tools, right? I mean, first time I introduced Kahoot, they didn't know how to sign up. They didn't know how to connect from mobile, from laptop. How do I do this? How do I do that? I try to be very, very patient, and I try to be consistent. I try to use the good tools that I find over time. With Ment.io, which is the most consistent tool that I'm using, I find that the challenge, the learning curve, is in my expectations. They know how to use it. It feels to them like, and this is true to many, many tools, it feels to them like social media in a way, right? They are more familiar than technology than I am. However, I have expectations as to how they conduct a discussion. And so I find myself, and this is what I also hear from colleagues around the world, first 2, 3, 4 discussions, I give them advice. I try to direct them. I very humbly suggest that they provide more evidence to their arguments. Those, I've heard instances where students write, I agree. That's a great answer. It's not helpful for the discussion. It's wonderful to see. So my job there is to make sure that they understand what I expect from them. And different teachers expect different things. So I don't think there's a one menu that we could give all students to tell them this is how you adopt a new tool. I think it's up to us to make sure that they adopt it in a way that is meaningful for this particular context. I hope that helps. You're on mute, Zvika.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Anat. That's great. So Min Chen, our Min Chen from Michigan, is asking some interesting question about classes size. She actually uses Ment and plans to incorporate Ment in a rather large class, a class of 160 students to be exact, which is obviously quite a significant size class to moderate. Maybe you can share some best practices on how to take a big class where you want to have asynchronous discussion, and what would be your top tips for that kind of use case?
Thank you, Min, for that question, and thank you for being here. I think that, again, just following my previous answer about our particular set of expectations, I've seen small groups with tons of activity, like tons and tons of activity. And I've seen groups that have more moderate activity. And I think it depends on the students and it depends on the teacher, what type of discussion is being generated, what type of activity. The reason I mentioned the high levels of activity and more moderate ones is to say, if you have if you expect moderate levels of activity, for example, you expect your students to visit the discussion board once a week, twice a week top, and you're only posting one discussion each week, then a group of over 100 is not a problem. It's great. That's a wonderful size for one team. And you'll have a very engaged discussion, right? Because each will contribute their main thought, their main contribution, and contribute to one or two or more others. However, and that's again a sort of a warning, the platform is engaging. So I would advise thinking about creating smaller groups every once in a while, or generating more than one question. I normally generate about 3 questions per week. And so the more questions that you generate, then the students, and if you direct the students to refer to the question that is most interesting to them, again, you can keep that size. Alternatively, you can divide them into smaller teams on Menti.io, or stay with the large team and just create group A, this is your question, group B, this is your question. So I have so many answers to that because it varies, and it really does depend on the type of engagement that you would like to see from your students.
Thank you, Anat. An interesting question coming from Alice that I think many of you will be interested. So active learning also introduces challenges, right? It kind of creates, if I interpret the question correctly, a lot of need for instructor moderation, right? Because specifically in writing, and some topics are sensitive, and things, everyone knows about the things that are going on now with politics, and with things that are maybe associated also with mental health of people. How do you govern or moderate better in an active learning kind of mode? What would be your advice on moderation in general? And I hope I'm addressing Alice's question properly, but I'm doing my best, and you can also send some clarifying remarks later. But Anat, any thoughts on moderation in specific?
Thank you. Yes, I'm thinking about this quite a lot, and I'm thinking about this from a few different directions. The first one is, how do I get everyone on board? I don't want the loudest to take over the conversation, for example. So that is one aspect that I'm concerned with, and the anonymous mode that I just showed you is a way to encourage those who are a bit more timid to say what they think without feeling uncomfortable. So that's one way. Secondly, experience shows me that, and again, experience of myself and other professors using Menti.io, that on the written platform, somehow those that I don't normally hear in class feel more comfortable to express themselves. So that is naturally happening on the platform. And you're asking how to mediate the way that they discuss. I think that's an additional aspect of the conversation, another area to think about. And when I think about that, first of all, I was really surprised to find that after you direct the students a little bit at first, as I mentioned in the first few discussions, and they get the hang of it, I haven't seen and I have not heard of misuses of the ability to express their voice. On the contrary, they are super respectful. Most students really across the board, anywhere in the world, anywhere that we've seen using the platform, are really respectful of others. If anything, we need to encourage them to disagree with someone rather than agree with them, which is always safer. And worst cases, you could delete, and this is being very, very practical, you could delete or edit, because you're the admin, you and your TAs, if you have ones, or colleagues to teaching, you could delete and edit comments. But experience shows that students feel very privileged, and this goes back to the well-being aspects that I mentioned. I think they feel very privileged that their colleagues are reading and that we are reading what they think and their experience. And so there's hardly any moderation needed. There's that would be the main argument I'm trying to make.
Thank you. A question coming from Heather about integration to synchronous providers like Zoom. So Our Zoom integration is currently in the oven, and this is something that will allow, for example, to instructors to embed some Zoom or recorded videos into a specific Ment discussion. And remember, we are trying to move the learning process to the asynchronous area. So actually, I think that in many ways the trend is going the other way around. Like when COVID ends, we are not sure whether Zoom will have that much bandwidth coming from education, but definitely the asynchronous mode and any asynchronous tool, Mentaio or other, will still have the necessity because that's where learning happens. So yeah, there are definitely such integrations. We are obviously, as mentioned, integrated into any LMS, and maybe this also falls into your other LMS integration. Are we integrated into the gradebook? So yeah, we are integrated into any grading component of any LMS. Not only that you get the assessment within Mentaio, but it's also being fed back in an editable mode. And of course, it's dependent on the LTI version that your LMS is based on. And we're humbled to be working with the latest and greatest versions, including the LTI Advantage that we also have one of our partners in the audience that we are very happy to have you, Rob, here, who's basically helping us shape like the cutting edge way of working with LTI. So thank you so much for that, and we are humbled to be doing the latest and greatest, and we'll be happy to demonstrate that. I hope that answers both questions. Um, so uh, Pita Gay actually asks something which is quite sensitive, and working with differently abled students, students with disabilities, students that by definition written expression may not be at their like strongest skills or assets. Anat, anything you can highlight on that in specific? I know it's a challenge, but again, just from your experience.
Um, Thank you. I think that is so important and so essential to everything that we do. I'm not an expert on that, and I just feel, and I have seen many of our users um, using Menti.io and thinking about active learning in general in regards to these particular issues. So on the practical level, I'll say we are compliant with all the accessibility requirements, which is really important because visually impaired, everything that can be done in terms of accessibility is being done on Menti.io. I think beyond that, it's a question of how we model the conversation. And I would, and that's what I try to do with students that I feel are struggling. I try to model a way of behavior in the discussion that is very tolerant, that is very favorable, that explains that sometimes that is very respectful in the way that it interprets what is going on in the discussion. So I think that is helpful. Again, to say that it is, I don't know if it's fair or unfair to say at the end of the day that it's up to us how we moderate and how we do things on the platform. We also have the ability on Menti.io, I didn't show it, but there's a one-on-one ability where you could create a conversation with a personal conversation with each and every one of the students. So that's another way of making sure that no one was missed and you haven't misinterpreted or some, just moderating everything that is going on in case you feel that you should. And I think the platform itself enables different levels of arguments. I want to say that as well, regardless of the issue of specific disabilities. We've seen Menti.io used anywhere from the younger grades, the smaller grades. I'm kind of at a loss of my English at this very second, but the first graders and all the way to the highest education. I'm just following, Zvika, if that's okay, a stream of thought to make that argument as well, to just say, we've seen wonderful discussions in philosophy taking place in the second grade. Particularly, it was in Chile, I think, where they created a discussion around why should we put the shopping cart back into place. And it was a very, very engaged and lively discussion with wonderful arguments that weren't all very coherently articulated, but they were wonderfully understood and perfectly making the point. So it kind of took me to that direction of thinking, but I hope I answered the question in the first part of my answer. Thank you for asking that. That is so important.
So I'm actually always thrilled when there's more questions and interaction than actual time. So it means that we kept this discussion interesting, and I think in that sense our goal for today was achieved. I must say that we do want to continue this discussion, and we'll throw here in the chat your ways to contact us on anything regarding active learning discussion boards, tools, or even if you're interested in hearing and seeing more from Menta.io. And of course, we'll make sure that you're invited to our next webinars, because it's just about building the right audience. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm writing here some emails where we can continue this discussion. I want to thank Anat for giving this interesting talk. Even when I talk to Anat every day, whenever I hear her talk about learning process and techniques, I learn something new. I hope this was helpful to you as well. Thank you so much for your time, and we would love to stay in touch. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.